Hello, I'm Steph from iDriver Classic, and today we're back looking at something that is very different from what we've seen so far in 2023. We're looking at this incredible Fiat 1200 Cabriolet from 1962. It's coming up for sale with Bidding Classics auctions. As usual, everything's in the description box below. And when they said to me, Steph, do you want to take it out? I jumped at the chance because it's a very rare vehicle at the best of times, and it was really close, and I thought this is the perfect opportunity. So in today's video we're going to have a look at this. I'm going to tell you the history behind the car, and we're going to talk all about it and give it a jolly good go out on the road as well. So who could ask for more? But first of all, before we do any of that, we have got a very brief message about our channel sponsor. Life is too short to drive something boring. So if you're looking for your first classic or your next classic, why not check out Bidding Classics auctions? Whether it's something pre-war, mid-century, or maybe something newer like a retro hot hatchback, check out their website. There's a link in the description box below, or you can Google Bidding Classics auctions. There's new stuff going on the website every single week, so why not check them out? Now let's go back to the video. Italian viewers, I'm so sorry, I'm about to butcher some Italian words. Please forgive me for my sins. So let's first of all talk about how we get to the Fiat 1200 Cabriolet. And the journey of it all begins way back in 1957, when Fiat brings in two new cars. These are the 1200 Granluce, which is a four-door saloon, and the 1200 Spyder, which is a two-door roadster. Now these 1200 cars had come in as a bit of a conservative step up from the Fiat 1100, and by conservative I mean there's not too much engineering going on, things haven't changed hugely. Now the Fiat 1100 had come to market in the early 50s because of course we're still in that strange period after the Second World War where manufacturers don't have lots of money and they're trying to make new cars, bring new things to market, but without a massive budget. Now if you look at the 1100, it's easy to see that the Granluce is a derivative of that 1100 saloon. In my opinion, it's a lot more fresh, it's a lot more sporty looking, but it is a derivative of. Now the Spyder is a refresh of Bad Italian Incoming, the Trasformabile, which I believe that's how I say it, apologies if not, which is in itself is a very nice little car, but it's not quite as sporting looking as that 1200 Spyder. Now the 1200 cars, I talk about it being a conservative step up. What I mean by that is that they're largely based on 1100 underpinnings. It's got that 1221cc engine and a 4 forward speed box. Now I will talk about this later on, but the engine in this is no longer that original engine, and nor is the gearbox, but again, more on that later. Now, in 1959, Fiat aren't giving up. They're still going. They're still energising. They're still creating. They unveil what we've got here today, the 1200 Cabriolet. Now, the car was running that 1200cc engine that we talked about earlier on, but the car, when it was debuted at the Geneva Motor Show in 1959, was a Pininfarina design. It was incredibly special. Now, whilst you see that Pininfarina badging on this, the model was actually assembled at more Bad Italian Incoming. Somebody told me how to pronounce this the other day. Carrozzeria Speciale Officine Lingotto, part of the Torinese house. Now, it wasn't just any old car, and in fact, it was coach built with artisan methods. It was an incredibly special car, and it wasn't made in enormous numbers. Now, when you look at the Pininfarina Cabriolets, because they didn't really stop there, there are two generations. Now, this car we're testing today is a 1962 car, which marks it as being part of that first 1200 Cabriolet generation, and now that ran from 1959 through to 1963. The second generation runs 64 to 66, and that's when they saw a permanent move towards the bigger engines, and that was to compete with the sports car market. And they also brought in that 5-speed box, which of course is always a welcome addition, especially when you're doing high speeds and over long stretches of country on motorway. So what about the present day? Well, in today's market, these Pininfarina Cabriolets present themselves as a great alternative to some of the more widely spotted mid-century convertible cars that I think we've seen and we've done and dusted, and the prices are really inflated. And yes, I'm looking at you, MGBs. TRs and things like the TR6, the TR4s, the TR4As, they are so expensive now. So when we look at something like this, especially this particular car with this uprated engine with the slower days behind it, they're a great alternative. Now personally, I can't afford some of these bonkers prices that people are asking for some of these, especially British mid-century and later 20th century convertibles. So I've been hunting out the cheaper classics and the cheaper alternatives, which was why I wanted to show you this today, because I definitely think it's one of those. Now we've had a look around the outside, we've had a brief talk through the history. Now let's jump inside and I'll walk you through the dash. When you take out a car of this age, one of the first things I always do is start having a dig around to see what's original and what's been changed. And I know that if you're watching this video and you are a Fiat 1200 fanatic, you're going to point out to me that there's been a few major changes. So let's address them and talk about them, because for me, I think it's quite interesting. And also something I wanted to demonstrate on this that I can't, so I'm going to talk about it. Under the bonnet, we have now got the dual overhead cam 1600 engine from a Fiat 124, and that was put in the car very early on in its life. I thought when I was reading the notes that it was going to be something that was done in maybe the 80s, the 90s or recently, but it was actually done in the very early 70s. So the majority of this car's life, it has had that engine with it. And as well as that, this has got a 5-speed box in it. Now originally these had a four forward speed and reverse box in, but this has been upgraded at some point. I'm not entirely sure what that's out of, but I wanted to mention it as well. But I think the big thing, if you are a Fiat 1200 fan, is the interior. Now it has been retrimmed, and we've talked about this a lot actually in recent videos, whether you should retrim or leave as original and what that does. And so the thing for me is this is a bit of a double-edged sword. Number one, the interior in this is dead tidy. It's really nice, it's been retrimmed well, it's not been a cheap job done. But for me, the thing that I would love to have tested for you and I would have loved to have shown for you is that the original seats pivot. So the idea is that ladies and gents entering or exiting the car, well probably ladies because they're going to be the ones at the time in pencil skirts, they can pin it round essentially so it goes and you can just get out and you're not having to clamber out. Because as someone who always wears a skirt, I can tell you my exit from this vehicle and entry really has actually been quite undignified. Now coming inside, you've probably noticed that the dash is quite basic. Of course it is a car from the 60s, so we would expect a degree of that, but also it was a cautious time for Fiat, because if you remember back and if you know much about history, you'll know that Italy was still recovering from the Second World War. People's finances were tight, people were very conservative with where the money was going. You couldn't afford to splash out left, right and centre. So there are bits of this that are probably quite conservatively put together. Of course it has got that older chassis from the 1100, etc. And there's various other bits that people think, oh, they've cut a cost there, why didn't they invest more, why didn't they do this? So that might give you a bit of insight why. Now coming in front of us, we have got two main dials. And we've either got a surprise today or it's not working, so hopefully it's not working. The left hand side dial, you've got the temperature gauge, that seemed to be working, but below that you've got the fuel gauge and that didn't seem to be working earlier. So I hope that it's not working and we're not about to run out of petrol on the test. On the right hand side you've got your speedometer and that doesn't appear to be functioning at the moment. Not to worry, I don't think the odometer's working either, which means that that mileage, which looks quite low at 25k, may not be entirely genuine. So it's there, you can see it, but I'm just saying that I can't guarantee if that's correct or not. Now if you remember when we looked at the Triumph 1300 and I told you about how we had to get the lights on by switching a switch and then moving an arm, we have to do that in this as well. So over to the left hand side of the key here we've got this switch and then we've got this arm that we move and that gives you all elements of your lights. So you've got your main beam, side, etc. Just in front of that you've got your indicators and then you've got this horn. Have a listen. I love that, it's so cheeky. Now coming down from that you can probably see we've got the heater. Now this I've not managed to get working, but you've got 3 switches in front of that, and those 3 switches operate the heater and control all of it. So I've not been able to get my head entirely around it, but that is what they're there for. Over on the right hand side here, you've got this little ashtray, which I tried to levy out, but look, it's not my vehicle. I'm not going to try and force it out. I like to be very gentle with test vehicles, but that's there. And then you've got a grab handle as well. I guess that's for when I start putting my foot down across the Yorkshire moors. And that is pretty much everything in a nutshell. I guess the other 2 things to mention are the wipers. So they're operated on this little dial turn here, and you've got your cigar lighter there as well. Now, something that I'm hopefully going to be able to show you when we're out driving is the handbrake. It's really odd because of where it is. I know that we're a left-hand drive vehicle. I found it quite easy to drive so far because I've just driven it down the road and round, and it's been easy enough, but this handbrake keeps catching me out. I don't like where it's put, but look, very small complaint. Now, there's one other confession I have to make, is that these seats are bolt down to the floor, and I was talking to the owner and I said, how much of a faff is it for us to move this seat? And it seemed to be quite a faff, and then we'd have to put it back in for him and all the rest of it. So I said, do you know what? Don't worry about it. What we'll do to get around this is I'll just put some coats behind me when I drive. So if you see me driving with some coats behind me today, that's because the owner of the car is a lot taller than I am, and I'm just basically pushing myself closer to the pedals. But hey, a 60s car requires a 60s solution. So I know you're probably wondering what the engine sounds like. Now, I know it's that 1600 under there, but have a listen anyway. It sounds really raughty when you hear it from the back. And hopefully we'll be able to capture that once we're out driving today. Now, do you know what I'm going to show you, actually, which has caught me out today? You can tell that I've not been in not really many old vehicles lately. It's when I turned the key to start it earlier, I turned it and I was like this. I was like, oh God, it's turning and I can't turn it. And I had to confess to the owner I couldn't work out how to start it. So to start this, you have to turn the key and then push it in and then turn it. So have a listen. Oh, it sounds so good. Listen, have a listen again. And what you may not be able to get at home is every time I give it a little blip on the throttle, the whole car goes like it's just as excited as me. Now let me flip the camera around and show you from the back as well before we go out for a drive. Now this little Fiat, I've probably re-recorded this test drive 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 or 7 times because it's an interesting beast to get your head around. A lot of the boxes ticked straight away. So number 1, the handling is incredibly light. The visibility is perfect, if I'm honest. I couldn't ask for more. The seats, although they're not original, are really comfortable. But the thing for me that I just cannot get my head around is changing gear. It is quite difficult. I think that if this is the car for you and you've been out in one of these before, you'll be okay with it, you'll be fine. But it feels very different to what I'm used to and everything that I've been out in recently, that I'm finding it quite challenging, if I'm being truthful, quite challenging to get into the swing of. And I like to be very honest with you at home because otherwise, where's my sense of integrity? And this one for me is a little bit tricky, but I'm doing my best. Now, as well as that lovely handling, it has an incredible exhaust note. It sounds great as you're driving it. And if you've been looking at stuff like MGBs and you've been looking at some of the TRs and the prices just seem to keep going up and up and up, this might be an attractive alternative, because I did ask the owner what it was like to get parts, and I've been told that the parts availability is incredibly, it's incredibly fruitful. You can get everything that you need, and so you're not up against that. So realistically, if you're a bit pluckier than I am and you love that Pininfarina styling and you're loving just the whole look of it, and trust me, once you get your head around that gearbox, and I reckon if you sent me out for the day in it, I could get my head totally in gear with it. But for a test drive, it's a little bit trickier. So if you come and have a look at this and that puts you off, don't be dissuaded. Because I remember the first time I went out in a Morris Minor, I couldn't get my head around that. So if you love everything about this, that won't bother you. But I like to be honest on these test drives. And as you can see, car's quite bouncy, so as we come over, there's so many speed bumps around here, and as we come over all of them, it's kind of quite bumpy, but that's a very small complaint. As you can see, it picks up well as we come up through these hills, and it's just altogether a really fun car. The owner himself, he was saying, I think he's been to Italy in it, he's been absolutely everywhere, he's been to the south of France. It's a reliable, good fun car that you can do great miles in. It's comfortable, it's got loads of room. I mean, that back seat isn't particularly usable, but say you had a dog or you had some small people that you could just chuck in the back, you'd be absolutely fine for it. You wouldn't have it as a worry. So for me, it's been a complicated love affair today. Absolutely love the styling of it. Even though that dash is very simplified, it still pops in a way that a lot of cars of today just never will. The handling, the visibility, the comfort as both the driver and the passenger are great. But for me, that gearbox has just kind of put a bit of a damp squib on it. So remember, if this is a car that you've looked at in this video and thought, yes, I absolutely love it, check out the description box below. It's got all the details for bidding classics. And until next Sunday, when I hope we have much better weather and we're testing something very different once again, take care and drive safely.